June 3rd, 1881, Deadwood, Dakota Territory. The church doors blew open like a storm had hit, and the bride stood alone beneath the archway, her veil trembling in the wind. Liora Renshaw did not cry. She did not scream. She just held her white skirts in her fists and stared down the dirt road where her would-be groom had ridden off not 10 minutes before, dust still hanging in the air behind him. The townsfolk whispered. Some pitied her. Some looked away. But no one stepped forward. Except one man. Zeke Jarrett had seen plenty in his 31 years. Gunfights, cattle rustling, men hung for less. But he had never seen a woman look so still while her whole world cracked beneath her feet. He stepped down from where he had been leaning against the rail post outside the general store. His hat was in his hand before his boots hit the street. "Ma'am," he said gently, eyes meeting hers. Liora blinked, as if the sound of kindness surprised her more than being left. "Do not," she said, voice tight. "Do not tell me I am better off. Do not ask if I am all right. Just do not." Zeke nodded once. "All right. But you cannot stand alone in that doorway forever." "I will stand here until the sky breaks if I want," she answered. He glanced up. "Might not take long." Storms stirring. Liora looked past him. The wind had picked up. Clouds were rolling thick and gray over the hills. He stepped closer. "I got a cabin out west of town. Dry roof. Coffee on the stove. You do not need to talk. Just get in out of the weather." She hesitated. Then, with one sharp breath, she tugged off her veil and tossed it into the street like a challenge. "Fine." Zeke offered his arm. She did not take it, but she walked beside him, head high despite the whispers. By the time they reached his horse, the first drops of rain began to fall. Zeke helped her onto the saddle, then climbed up behind her without a word. His coat wrapped around her shoulders as the wind picked up. They rode hard through the trees, the sound of thunder chasing their heels. Inside his cabin, she sat by the fire while he poured coffee into 2 tin mugs. Her dress was damp around the hem, her boots muddy, but her spine stayed straight. Zeke set the mug beside her. "Name's Zeke Jarrett." She looked at him a long moment. "Liora Renshaw." He nodded. "Figured." The fire crackled. Outside, the rain came heavy. He pulled off his hat, set it on the peg near the door. "You hungry?" She shook her head. He pulled a chair beside hers, sat down slow. "I was supposed to be married today," she said quietly. "I figured that too. I met him last winter. He was passing through. Said he wanted to settle. Said he wanted a family. I believed him." Her voice was steady, but her fingers gripped the cup too tight. "He left a note. Said he was not ready. That he thought he was, but..." Zeke did not reply. He just leaned forward and lit the second lamp. Liora looked up at him. "You do not seem surprised. I have seen men run from less." She looked down at her hands. "My father is back east. My mother passed last fall. I have nothing here now. Except shame." "No shame in being left," Zeke said. "Shame is his." She looked at him then, really looked. His hair was damp at the temples, his jaw rough with stubble. There was no pity in his face. Just quiet steadiness. "I do not want to be alone tonight," she said. Zeke held her gaze. "You will not be." They listened to the rain for a long time. Then Liora stood. "You said something earlier. About marriage." He blinked. "I did not." She stepped closer. "But I see it in your eyes." Zeke stood too. "You are grieving." "I am angry," she corrected. "And I am done letting men decide what I am worth." Her voice softened. "You seem like the kind who keeps his word." "I do." She reached for his hand. "Then marry me. Before sundown." Zeke stared at her, thunder rolling outside the walls. "You sure?" "I have never been more sure." He nodded once. "There is a preacher in town. Lives above the livery." Leora's mouth lifted just slightly. "Then let us not waste time." They rode back through the rain, wind whipping her hair loose. The townsfolk had scattered, doors shut tight against the storm. But the preacher opened his door with a surprised blink and a scratch of his beard. "You are the same woman from earlier?" he asked. "I am," Liora said. "But I am not the same." Zeke looked at her, the way she stood beside him now, not broken, not bitter, just strong. The preacher lit a lamp. "All right then. Do you have rings?" Zeke pulled a leather string from his pocket, a silver ring tied to it. "My mother's," he said. Liora reached into her skirt and found the ring she had worn earlier. "This will do for now." The ceremony was short. No one else attended. But when Zeke took her hand and said, "I do," His voice was steady as earth. And when she said the same, her eyes never left his. By sundown, they were husband and wife. They rode back in silence, but it was not heavy. It was calm. In the cabin that night, Zeke spread an extra quilt over the bed. "You do not have to," Liora began. "I know," he said softly, "but you deserve time." She stepped close. "I have had enough time. I want you beside me." He looked at her, his hands rough and still. "All right." They lay down together, not as strangers, not as the broken and the healer, but as two people who had seen the worst of the day and still chose each other. Zeke wrapped his arm around her, and she tucked her head beneath his chin. Outside, the storm faded into nothing but wind through the pines. Inside, the warmth of something rare began to grow slow, strong, and steady. And neither of them felt alone again. The morning broke pale and cold. Zeke was already up, stooped beside the stove coaxing heat from the coals he'd banked the night before. He didn't look over when Liora stepped down from the loft, her steps careful on the ladder, one hand holding her borrowed skirt in place. She crossed to the basin and poured water from the pitcher, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. "You keep flour in the bin by the door?" Zeke nodded without turning. "Sack with blue stitching. Second shelf." She found it, ran her fingers through the grain. "It's clean." He finally stood and met her eye. "I don't eat dirt. You live alone. I lived clean before you came." Liora pulled a bowl down and began measuring by sight. "I saw the way you folded that quilt last night. Not many men do that careful." Zeke leaned back against the wall, arms folded, watching her work. "Not many women say yes to a man they've known only a day." She didn't pause. "I said yes to someone else once. Look how that turned out." He didn't answer. Outside, a hawk cried low over the pines. Inside, the room smelled of wood smoke and flour dust. "Do you want children?" she asked, without looking up. Zeke's jaw moved, but he didn't answer right away. "I hadn't thought about it for a long while." Liora glanced over. "You thinking about it now?" "I'm thinking about what kind of life you want. You didn't ask to be here." She met his gaze. "I chose it. You asked." "I said yes. That's more choice than most women get." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure if you meant it for more than the night." "I don't say things I don't mean." Zeke crossed the room and stood beside her. She smelled of rain-damp linen and ash. He reached for the tin of salt without brushing her hand, gave her space. "Then we'd best figure out how to build a life that holds both of us." She took the salt, sprinkled it lightly. "I don't know what I'm good at anymore. You made coffee strong and biscuits even. That's a start." She gave him a look. "That's not a life. It's the first hour of one." By the time the biscuits browned and the coffee boiled, the light outside had shifted through the trees enough to show the path clear of last night's storm. Zeke saddled the mare while Liora packed the tin lunchbox with bread and dried apple slices. "Where are we going?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter across her shoulders. "Boundary line up near the ridge," he said, tightening the cinch. "There's a split-rail fence needs mending. Might as well start showing you the land." Liora stepped up onto the mounting block. "You expect me to help?" "I expect you to look. Decide if this place can be yours." They rode without hurry, the trail soft under the horses' hooves. The wind carried cedar and damp earth, and far off, the call of a meadowlark. Liora leaned back slightly in the saddle. "This doesn't feel like ownership. It feels like breathing." Zeke gave a half nod. "That's how I knew it was worth staying." They reached the ridge by midday. Zeke dismounted, pulled wire and a hammer from the saddlebag. Liora walked the fence line, her boots sinking just slightly into the softened loam. "This one's rotted through," she said, pointing to a post leaning at a sharp angle. He followed her gaze. "Good eye. We'll dig a new hole." She took the shovel from his hand without asking. They worked in rhythm, Zeke driving nails while Liora packed the earth firm around the new post. When they paused to eat, they sat side by side on a flat rock, the valley stretching wide below them. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, biting into the bread. "I did once. After my brother died. Took me 3 months to come back." "Where'd you go?" "South. Didn't matter where. Just away." She looked at him, not pressing. He met her eyes. "I came back because I couldn't stand the quiet down there. It's different here." "Feels honest." Liora chewed slowly, then said, "I've never been anywhere that didn't feel like it belonged to someone else." Zeke brushed the crumbs from his fingers. Maybe that's because nobody ever asked what you wanted. She turned to him. And you're asking? I would not have married you if I wasn't. Liora studied his face. I want a place where I don't have to explain myself every time I speak. Where someone looks at me and doesn't see something broken. Zeke didn't flinch. Then you're in the right place. They sat in silence after that. The kind not heavy or awkward, just full of the things that didn't need to be said yet. When they stood to go, Zeke offered his hand. Liora took it without hesitation. His grip was warm, grounded, like the post they'd just set into the earth. By the time they rode back, the light had turned honeyed through the trees. Zeke opened the cabin door and stepped aside. Liora crossed the threshold. I'll clean the tools while you start the fire. He nodded. Good. Then we'll talk about the barn. Roof leaks near the back. She paused and looked over her shoulder. You sure you want me fixing your place? Zeke met her eyes. It's not mine anymore. She didn't smile, not quite, but her voice softened. Then we've got work to do. The first week passed with the kind of quiet that settled in the bones. Mornings came early, the air still holding the bite of spring's retreat. Liora woke before the sun, not from any habit, but because she wanted to. There was work to do, and she meant to be part of it. Zeke didn't hover. He didn't instruct unless she asked. He let her find her place in the rhythm of the land. She started with the henhouse, replacing the latch that hung crooked. Then she cleared the overgrowth near the well, her hands blistering and calloused by the fourth day. One evening after supper, she set her spoon down and asked, Was your mother a quiet woman? He glanced up, surprised by the question. No. She had a voice like gravel and used it to keep 4 boys from burning the place down. You the oldest? Second. First died in Missouri during the war. I was 16. She nodded once. What was his name? Caleb. Liora folded her hands in her lap. I like knowing that. Zeke looked at her a moment longer, then said, What about yours? My mother? He nodded. She hummed when she was angry. Not a tune, just a sound in her throat. I used to think she didn't want to say something she'd regret. Turns out she just didn't trust her voice when it got soft. Zeke leaned back, the light from the oil lamp catching the edge of his jaw. You hum. No. I speak. The next morning, Liora found a battered ledger tucked between canning jars on the shelf beside the stove. She pulled it down, dust thick on the cover, and carried it outside where Zeke was oiling the hinges on the barn door. Didn't know you kept accounts, she said, holding it up. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag. Had to, after my father passed. There's land tax and feed costs in there. You think something's off? No, she said, thumbing through the pages. But I can keep it better. If you want. Zeke looked at her, long enough that she raised a brow. What? Nothing. Just didn't expect you to want numbers. I like order. Always have. She tucked the ledger under her arm. Besides, if I'm staying, I want to know what we're standing on. You're staying. She nodded once. Then I want to see every corner of what's ours. That night, she sat at the table with the ledger open and a stub of pencil between her fingers. Zeke worked on a harness strap near the hearth, quiet except for the occasional scrape of leather. She didn't look up when she said, I never thought I'd want to be looked at the way you look at me. He didn't stop working. How do I look at you? Like I'm already yours, but you're still asking. Her voice was steady. I don't know how to answer kindness like that. I was raised on obligation. Zeke set the strap down. Then forget the way you were raised. We'll make something different. She looked at him then, the lamplight softening the edges of her face. I think I already am. The next day, he took her west, past the creek, and up through a stand of ash trees. He didn't say where they were headed, only that she should wear her riding gloves. They reached a clearing just before noon. It was nothing special on first glance, just grass and a few low stones, but Zeke dismounted and walked to a split in the earth where a thin stream trickled down. This is where I come when I need to think, he said. She followed him, brushing a branch aside. You don't strike me as someone who gets tangled in his thoughts. I don't show it when I do. She crouched by the water, dipping her fingers in. It's colder than I thought. Snow melt from higher up. Won't warm for weeks yet. They didn't speak again for some time. Birds passed overhead, and the wind moved through the grass in slow, rustling waves. Finally, Liora said, I don't know what kind of wife I'm going to be. Zeke stepped closer, but didn't touch her. You don't have to decide all at once. I don't want to be something you carry. I want to carry too. He looked out across the clearing. Then we'll carry together. You already are. She stood, brushing her skirt free of leaves. You think we'll last? We've already started, he said. That's more than most. When they returned to the cabin, the sky was streaked with the gold of late afternoon. Liora went to the hearth and stirred the stew she'd left simmering. Zeke cleaned the tack without being asked. Later, as they sat close on the edge of the bed, Liora reached for his hand. I want you to come to me tonight, she said, her voice quiet but certain. Not out of duty. Because you want to. Zeke touched her cheek, his thumb rough but careful. I've wanted to since the first time you looked me in the eye. Neither of them said more. There was no need. That night, they found each other not with haste, but with all the patience they had been learning day by day. In the hush between breaths, in the way their fingers learned new paths across each other's skin, there was no trace of the woman left at the altar, nor the man who kept to himself for so many years. There was only the beginning of what they were building. Something real. Something that would hold. By the third week, the snowmelt had soaked deep into the pasture, and the green was coming in thick behind the barn. Liora stood barefoot on the porch, apron damp from scrubbing the floorboards. Her hair was pinned high, loose strands curling at her temples in the midday warmth. Zeke was down by the corral, hammering a new gate into place where the old one had splintered. She watched the way his shoulders moved under the linen of his shirt, the pull of muscle smooth and sure. There was no rush in him, only precision. He didn't look up when she stepped off the porch and came toward him, but he slowed his work. You ever think about building up the herd? She asked. He drove the last nail before replying. Not much use until we fix the north fence. Coyotes run through there easy. I could ride out with you. Learn the weak spots. He paused, then turned to face her. You sure you want to see that far out? It gets rough near the ridge. I don't want to see what's easy, she said. I want to see what might turn. He studied her for a long breath, then nodded. All right, we'll go at first light. That night, she opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, laying out a shirt that had belonged to his father, sleeves long and worn soft with years. She stitched along the torn cuff with steady fingers, her needle moving in clean, practiced lines. Zeke watched from the corner, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. You so quiet, he said. Grew up in a house where quiet meant safety, she replied. I don't mind it now, but I still work best when things are still. He didn't move. You want children soon or later? She didn't lift her eyes from the thread. Later, when I know the shape of this life better. When I know I can raise them without fear driving me. Zeke nodded once. You'd make a good mother. I'd want to be the kind who listens, not just speaks. You already are. She folded the shirt and set it aside. Do you ever think of leaving this land? Selling it, starting elsewhere? He shook his head. It's been in my family too long. If I left, I'd still see it every time I closed my eyes. She stood then, brushing her hands clean. Then let's make it hold something worth passing on. At dawn, they rode out with saddlebags packed and rifles slung across their backs. The sun lit the mist that clung to the low hills, and the trail narrowed the farther they went. Liora kept pace just behind him, her mare sure-footed on the rocky slope. When they reached the north fence, Zeke dismounted and crouched near a post snapped clean at the base. This is where they come through. Liora knelt beside him, fingers brushing the claw marks at the edge of the wood. They're desperate. Hunger makes anything braver. He stood, brushing dust from his palms. We'll need to set traps near the stream. You all right baiting? She met his gaze. I've done worse. They worked in tandem, laying fresh wire and reinforcing stakes. Around noon, Zeke handed her a strip of dried venison, and they sat side by side beneath a cottonwood, their backs pressed to the trunk. You ever miss the east? He asked. No. There was no air in the city. Only noise. She looked out at the hills. Here, everything has room to breathe. Zeke reached over and traced the edge of her sleeve, his touch light. You're different now. So are you, she said. You used to move like someone waiting for something to go wrong. He looked down at the dirt between his boots. I was. And now. He looked back at her, steady and unflinching. Now I'm just waiting to build more. They rode home in a hush, the kind that held no weight. When they reached the cabin, Liora unsaddled the mare without being told. Zeke set the traps by the barn, and she watched the ease in his movements, how he trusted her presence without question. That evening, They shared their meal at the table without speaking much. The hush between them felt full, not empty. Afterward, Liora lit the lamp and pulled a thin book from the shelf, poems, inked in faded print. She read aloud while Zeke whittled a branch into kindling. Her voice was soft but clear, shaping each word like it mattered. When she finished, he set the knife down. Read another. She glanced up. You like poetry? I like your voice when you speak it. She closed the book without a word, stood, and walked to him. Her fingers found his, calloused and warm. What do you see when you look at me now? She asked. He stood, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. I see my life. And I see it steady. Liora leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. Then let's keep building. Slow and true. Zeke pressed his lips to her hair. We will. Brick by brick. The night deepened around them, but the light inside the cabin held. The last frost came and went without ceremony, and the ground softened enough to take seed. Zeke turned the earth with a sharp-toothed plow and a horse he trusted, while Liora followed behind, dropping seed by hand into the furrows. Her sleeves were rolled high, the sun catching the pale bend of her throat as she moved in rhythm with the land. For the first time in years, Zeke felt a kind of quiet peace that didn't feel borrowed or brief. At midday, they paused beneath the cottonwoods, sharing the bread and onion jam she'd packed in a cloth napkin. Liora stretched her legs out into the grass and watched the wind move through the trees. Did you ever think about leaving Dakota? She asked, not looking at him. I thought about running from it, Zeke said, biting into the bread. But it never got farther than thought. She nodded slowly. I used to dream of Kansas. I had a cousin there who wrote about wide streets and music coming from open windows. But when I got older, I realized I didn't want a place that was already full. I wanted space to make something new. Zeke brushed a blade of grass from her shoulder. You think this is new enough? She gave a small breath of laughter. It's not finished, but it's ours. That night, they sat on the porch, a blanket across their knees, the stars sharp above them. The air carried the scent of ash from the stove, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called once and fell quiet. Liora leaned into him, her voice low. I never told you what I was going to do. If the wedding had gone the way it was meant to, you don't owe me that. I want you to know. She laced her fingers through his. I was going to take over the schoolhouse. The town offered it to me, said they needed a teacher who could read and keep order. I said yes, thinking it would give me purpose. But I was only taking it to fill the space where he would leave gaps. Zeke turned his gaze to her. You still want it? She shook her head. I want to build something that lasts longer than chalk on a slate. Something that grows. He pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. Then we'll keep going. 2 weeks later, Liora stood in the doorway of the old smokehouse, pulling branches of dried herbs from where they hung in the rafters. She'd taken to foraging with a woven basket Zeke had found in the loft, and the shelves inside the cabin now lined with jars filled by her hands yarrow, wild mint, elderflower. She studied the leaves, ran her fingers across their texture, and labeled them in a neat hand. Zeke came in from the pasture, dust in his beard and a faint scrape on his forearm. There's a colt loose down by the willow, he said. Can't be more than a day old. Mother's spooked. I'll come, she said, setting the bundle aside. They rode down together, quiet but in step. The colt lay curled in the shadows, legs trembling when it tried to rise. Liora crouched first, hands held low, her voice a calm thread in the air. Zeke held back, watching the mare pace, ears twitching. She won't let me close. She might let me, Liora said. I speak softer. She moved slow, her skirt brushing the grass, and knelt beside the colt. The mare came forward, neck arched and tense, but Liora didn't flinch. She reached out, palm up, and waited. After a breath, the mare stepped close and nudged her fingers with her muzzle. Zeke exhaled. You've got hands like water. Liora looked up at him. No, I've just learned to stop pushing. They led the two back to the barn as the sun dipped low. That night, Liora bandaged the scrape on Zeke's arm with cloth soaked in her own tincture. Smells like vinegar, he muttered. Good. Means it'll keep clean. He studied her as she worked. You're not the same woman I met on that church step. She tied the bandage firm. Neither are you. They kissed without urgency, lips brushing like a promise already kept. When he lifted her into his arms, she didn't resist. And when they lay together, it was with the ease of something known and wanted. Summer came with warm rains and tall grass. Zeke built a second chicken coop, and Liora planted squash along the fence. They began to speak of next year, of building a second room, of putting up a smokehouse that wouldn't lean. One evening, Liora stood at the edge of the field and called him over. "Come see." He joined her, wiping his hands on his trousers. She pointed at the rows nearest the fence. "We'll have food enough to last through the cold." He rested his hand against her back. "Then we'll have time enough to rest." "I don't want to rest," she said, turning toward him. "I want to raise a child here. With you." His breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of it. Then he smiled, slow and sure. "Then we'll start getting ready." She touched his face, eyes shining. "I never thought I'd have something steady." Zeke kissed her, long and full of all the quiet joy they'd built between them. "You don't have to think anymore. You have it now." Years passed, but the quiet between them never turned hollow. It deepened. They added a root cellar and a second corral. Their first child came during the fall rains, a boy with dark eyes and a strong cry. Liora held him to her chest as Zeke sat beside her, their hands clasped tight. They named him Caleb. In time, Liora taught all three of their children to read at the table Zeke had carved from pine. He built each of them their own stool, sanded smooth and low to the ground. They grew sturdy in the shadow of the hills, and they learned early that love could be quiet and still last. Neighbors came by in twos and threes, some for supper, some for help with a fence or a storm-damaged roof. Liora kept herbs for fevers and burns and knew what to say when someone lost too much. Zeke taught the older boys how to mend harness and read the sky for weather. In the evening, when the children slept, they still sat on the porch together, sharing the hush like a prayer. Sometimes he'd take her hand and trace the lines of it, and she'd lean into his shoulder. They never spoke of the day she was left behind. It had become something distant, like a storm that passed over without finding root. In the end, they built more than a home. They built a life threaded with purpose and gentleness, shaped by work, and filled with love that never needed proving. And when they grew old, they stayed right there, side by side, in the cabin they'd made their own, with the hills still holding them close.